The 1970s really were the best time for horror. We've already talked about the big names from that decade, and in a few lists we've covered the underrated or forgotten ones. But every time, the comment section filled up with movies I hadn't mentioned, films that deserve just as much attention. So today, we're going back to the 70s once again, this time with your picks, the movies you reminded me not to miss. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark is a TV movie, and several others in this list are too, but it's far stronger than you might expect. To beat an impending writer's strike, the film was greenlit, cast, shot, and edited in just 2 weeks. Director John Newland and writer Nigel McKeand had no history with horror, yet you'd never guess it, because nothing about the film feels rushed or half-baked. The story follows Sally and her husband as they move into an old Victorian house. Against warnings, Sally opens a sealed fireplace in the basement, unleashing small, goblin-like creatures that had been trapped there for decades. The creatures haunt Sally when she's alone, whispering her name while her husband brushes it off his nerves. But the climax is what makes Don't Be Afraid of the Dark stand out. Unexpected, unsettling, and the reason the film became more than just another TV horror. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark also left its mark on a young Guillermo del Toro. As a kid, he and his brothers would whisper, "Sally, Sally," to spook each other. Years later, he produced and co-wrote the 2011 remake, though unlike the original, it's not one you need to see. People without kids don't know how lucky they are. That line captures the core of It's Alive. Written and directed by Larry Cohen, it was his breakthrough, a movie that pushed the idea of the Frankenstein story into the delivery room. The film begins like a family drama. Frank and Lenore Davis head to the hospital to welcome their second child. But within minutes, the baby slaughters the doctors and nurses and escapes into the city. While the killings continue off-screen, Cohen shifts the focus to the parents. Frank loses his job, the press hounds them, and doctors insist they must have done something to cause this. Hints are dropped about pollution, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, but no explanation is ever confirmed. Frank refuses to see the child as his own, calling it a monster that must be destroyed. By the end, the story plays less like a cheap killer baby shocker and more like a bleak parable about fear. And It's Alive didn't stand alone. It was followed by 2 solid sequels that expanded the original's ideas in stranger, wilder directions. Need to be careful talking about the other, so nothing gets spoiled for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. The story takes place on a Connecticut farm in the summer of 1935. 10-year-old twins Niles and Holland live with their Russian grandmother, while their mother is still deep in grief after the sudden death of their father. Ada, the grandmother, encourages Niles to believe he has a special gift that lets him sense more than other children. Holland, meanwhile, is wilder and more reckless, often dragging his brother into trouble. Directed by Robert Mulligan and adapted from Thomas Tryon's novel, The Other builds unease slowly, weaving tragedy and menace into the rhythms of daily life. Tryon himself reportedly hated the adaptation, but the film clearly influenced later filmmakers. And once you've seen it, you'll know exactly which ones. Crowhaven Farm may not hold up as well today, but if you saw this as a kid in the 70s, it's the kind of TV movie that carries a certain nostalgic pull. The story follows Ben and Maggie Porter, who inherit a farm in Massachusetts after relatives die in a strange accident. Ben struggles as an artist, Maggie longs for a child, and they hope the move will bring them closer. But once they settle in, Maggie is plagued by visions and dreams tied to the farm's dark past, a place where a witch was executed centuries earlier. Like many TV horrors of its era, Crowhaven Farm blends occult themes with a haunted house atmosphere, echoing the influence of Rosemary's Baby. At the same time, it suffers from the same issues as other network horror movies of the period: pacing that drags, scares that feel forced, and performances that don't always land. Still, The mood of creeping dread and the final act leave an impression. Author David Norliss was supposed to be writing a book debunking the supernatural. Instead, he vanishes, leaving behind a stack of cassette tapes for his publisher. The first tape tells the story of Mrs. Court, a widow whose husband refuses to stay in his grave. Soon there are attacks, bodies drained of blood, and clues pointing to an ancient Egyptian ring tied to Mr. Court's work before his death. The creature that returns is part zombie, part ghoul, and its presence drives the story's growing sense of dread. The idea came from NBC, eager to match the success of The Night Stalker. They brought in Dan Curtis and William F. Nolan, who shaped the film as a pilot for a possible series. The ending even leaves room for more, with the publisher reaching for another tape as the credits roll. Unfortunately, the show never materialized, which is a shame. The Norliss tapes had the makings of a strong addition to 1970s horror television. Promoted as one of the most bizarre movies to come out in the 1970s, The Baby lives up to the claim. On the surface, it looks like a funky 70s time capsule, with its music and fashion. But beneath that is something far stranger and deeply unsettling. The story begins with a social worker visiting the Wadsworth family, a domineering mother, her 2 daughters, and baby, a fully grown man forced to live like an infant. He sleeps in a crib, eats in a high chair, wears diapers, and crawls on the floor while the women control every part of his life. A fascinating story of sick love unfolds as a tug-of-war develops between the social worker and the family, as she believes that baby's mental and motor responses suggest he is capable of more than just being treated like an infant. Director Ted Post, better known for Magnum Force, also released in 1973, made sure this one was impossible to ignore. Martin is a withdrawn young man who believes he's a vampire. He doesn't have fangs. Instead, he uses syringes to drug his victims before cutting them with a razor and drinking their blood. When he goes to live with his uncle, the old man is convinced Martin truly is a creature of the night. He hangs garlic and crucifixes around the house, though they seem to have no effect. The film drifts between reality and delusion, with black and white flashbacks that might be memories or fantasies. Is Martin really a vampire, or just disturbed? The answer never comes, and the ambiguity makes the story more unsettling. At times, the pacing is slow, and some of the shots feel rough, but its strange, melancholy tone sets it apart. It was made by George A. Romero, best known for Zombies, but here he created one of the most unusual and haunting vampire films of the 1970s. More curiosity than classic, The Devil's Reign remains a strange slice of 1970s horror worth seeing at least once. The story follows 2 brothers, including one played by William Shatner, as they face a satanic cult led by Corbus, a leader with the power to melt his victims and even transform into a goat-like figure. The cult seeks a book stolen from them centuries earlier, and the struggle builds toward a fiery showdown. Adding to its odd legacy, the film had Anton LaVey, the Church of Satan's high priest, credited as a consultant, and it also features one of John Travolta's earliest screen appearances. The imagery of faceless cultists in black cloaks is striking, and the last minutes, when the whole cult melts on screen, are either unforgettable or just plain campy, depending on how you see it.